Welcome to Access Asia, I'm Yuka Goye. This week, as Cambodia marks 50 years since the Khmer Rouge overran Phnom Penh and began their brutal 4-year rule, we look at how the nation continues to grapple with Pol Pot's legacy under its current, increasingly authoritarian leadership. On the 17th of April 1975, the hardline Communist command swept into the Cambodian capital and overthrew the US-backed military government of General Lon Nol. Along with the fall of Saigon in Vietnam, it marked a turning point in Southeast Asia's post-war history. Jennifer Ben Brime tells us more.
A lesson in the horrors of the past for these Cambodian schoolchildren. This bus has been repurposed into a mobile museum just a few miles from a former Khmer Rouge labour camp. This 71-year-old survivor of the camp lost more than a dozen family members during Cambodia's bloodiest era.
It was so difficult during the regime. We had one bowl of rice among 10 people. By the end, we were given a grain of rice with a splash of water in the palm of our hands to eat.
Since 2024, this educational initiative has travelled around Cambodia, teaching children about the genocide that took place 50 years ago.
When I come and read books here, it helps me to understand a lot more about the crimes committed by the regime.
On April 17th, 1975, the Khmer Rouge communist regime led by Pol Pot seized the capital of Phnom Penh. The Khmer Rouge persecuted the educated city dwellers, who they believed to be tainted by Western capitalist ideas, and placed them in so-called re-education centres or prison camps. More than 2 million people died between 1975 and 1979 in what were called the killing fields, through executions, forced labour and starvation. Ahead of the 50th anniversary of the Khmer Rouge takeover, a 2013 law has been beefed up, with hefty jail sentences and fines for anyone who denies or glorifies the genocide. Some activists fear that the former Prime Minister Hun Sen is using the law to burnish his legacy as a hero and stifle any opposition to his successor, his son, Hun Manet.
Stories been told for a certain agenda by every factions, by different people. I think politicians need to drop using that part of history to benefit their own narratives and their own political ambition.
Former Prime Minister Hun Sen ruled Cambodia for almost 40 years, but started as a commander under Pol Pot. He eventually went into exile in 1977 before joining forces with other defectors, driving the Khmer Rouge out of Phnom Penh in 1979. The Cambodian genocide is one of the darkest periods in the country's history, and survivors welcome this stricter legislation.
Who dares to say there was no genocide? I can't use one of my ears or one of my eyes. They pulled the nail out of my right toe with a plier. My 4 children and my wife were all killed.
The 94-year-old sells books outside of a Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, a former prison. A site where foreign tourists can witness firsthand the horrors inflicted by the Khmer Rouge regime.
Now, for more on how memories and scars of the genocide continue to affect the country, we can cross now to Phnom Penh to speak with Cheng Po Un, Research Fellow at Cambodian think tank Future Forum. Cheng Po, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, more than 2 million people were killed under the Khmer Rouge. As a result, more than 60% of Cambodia's population today is under the age of 30. How is Cambodian society dealing with its past, and is it still traumatized by it?
Clearly, the clear consensus on the ground in Cambodia is that across generations, there is a clear consensus that the Khmer Rouge brought the worst destruction to the country, with the most severe human rights violation and most brutal atrocity committed against civilians in modern history, in both Cambodian and human history. The loss of life, human suffering, traumatization of shock generation due to the ideology called radicalism and ultranationalism still have a long-lasting impact on the Cambodian society today. People who still have direct experience and memory of the Khmer Rouge, those populations are shrinking fast, and a vast majority of Cambodians who are still living today and rebuilding the country are those generations who are born after the Khmer Rouge. So the transmission of the lesson experience and the key message of never again is quite important here, and we need to do it more actively here on the ground.
And has it been difficult actually to pass on those memories and, educate? How do children learn about those 4-year period in schools?
Yeah, in some family, it has been a very difficult taboo to encourage the survivor to share their story, to have an open discussion with their descendants and the generation born after the Khmer Rouge about the experience as well as their surviving story. The hidden scar that are was is that a trauma being transmitted unknowingly throughout generations of Cambodian family today that affect their lifestyle, their public participation, being in economic participation or political participation, or in the worldview, in their worldview today. So the lack of open, frank discussion in the family, in the household, leave the burden of education about the regime and the dark period in Cambodian history to the school and the education system, in which itself are still finding a way, an alternative to better deliver. The creation actually of the Khmer Rouge Tribunal and Tribunal Public Outreach in the past 20 years does provide a working model and assisting such education and creating a collective memory about the regime to the different and next generation of the Khmer Rouge, post-Khmer Rouge generation. However, harder work needs to be done actually here on the ground to ensure that we could move on from the question of what happened to why it happened and to how.
Now, national reconciliation has been quite difficult, hasn't it? Especially in the countryside with survivors living alongside former Khmer Rouge fighters.
Yes, it's very difficult, but Cambodian people have a very good strength as to, you see what happened in the 70s and the civil war that happened before and after that, how Cambodian people survive and rebuild their family, rebuild themselves, and rebuild the country after that. It's quite a remarkable and resilient story we should tell better, and we tell more here in on the ground, because many Cambodians forgive their perpetrator, especially those who survived the regime, but they have never forgot what being done to them in the regime. But the problem now is how we interpret the event about the Khmer Rouge and how they transmit these stories throughout generation is the key concern here.
Well, Cheng Pu On, thank you so much. The Khmer Rouge genocide has remained central to Cambodian politics ever since the regime fell from power in 1979 and the ensuing civil war ended in the 1991 Paris Accord. To get some deeper insight, we can speak with David Hutt, a journalist and research fellow at the Central European Institute of Asian Studies. David, thank you. Now, as we heard in that report, the recent update to a law banning genocide denial has become a concern, but Cambodia is not the only country banning genocide denial. France has a law that bans denying the Holocaust. What makes it more controversial than in Cambodia?
One question about the recent law, which was passed earlier this year, is what's the necessity for it? There's been very few cases brought to the courts regarding the previous law for denial. And the question is, what is the purpose of it? And what is the political purpose of it? We do have to remember that in Cambodia, under the current regime, which has been in power since 1979, when the leaders ousted the Khmer Rouge, is that the history of the Khmer Rouge era has been politicized. It has been politicized by the ruling regime. And it has been used to condemn opposition activists as traitors, as people who commit treason. And the central narrative of the ruling regime is that it brought salvation in 1979 and that Cambodia would tip back into the barbarism and the anarchy and the savagery of the Khmer Rouge era if the ruling party was ever ousted from power or even voted out of power.
So is toughening that exists in law, is there a concern that it would impact free speech? Would it make people more afraid to speak out then against the current regime?
one doesn't always know what they're going to be prosecuted for. There are so many statutes on the books that one could be prosecuted for free speech for many different things. And this is just yet another law which could potentially affect free speech.
Cambodia's transition to democracy has been fraught. It's become more of a dynastic one-party state under Hun Sen and his family, and the 2023 election served to consolidate that. Now, in this kind of political landscape, how our efforts to achieve national reconciliation and seek justice could be affected?
It's very difficult for there to be national reconciliation, especially around the Khmer Rouge era, when it is so politicized. And basically, the political landscape since the early 1990s has been divided between how two factions, how they see the events of 1979 when the Khmer Rouge was overthrown. For the ruling party, for the CPP, which is composed of many former Khmer Rouge commanders who left the Khmer Rouge, joined up with Vietnamese military, and then overthrew the Khmer Rouge. Their interpretation is this is Cambodia's salvation. Everything that's happened since has been peace and prosperity, and if they were to fall from power, it would be the return of barbarism. The opposition says that 1979, when the Khmer Rouge was overthrown, was yet another damnation, because they claim it was a new era of colonization by Vietnam and a new era of another tyrannous regime, and that Cambodia waits for its salvation moment again. So it's very hard to have this reconciliation when the entire political divide is basically split on this question of what the overthrow of the Khmer Rouge means.
Well, David Hutt, thank you so much for your insight.
You're welcome.
And that's all for this edition of Access Asia. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.